Hi friends. I wanted to walk you through creating this titles project in Qlab, okay? So there are a few things you need to do first before we even get started. One of those is go ahead and pull up your Google Doc, right, with your text. I'm gonna just quickly, because this is a short one, I'm gonna just make sure I have a little bit of extra space in between each of my blocks of text, right? Um, and I'm also actually going to add a second return in between each one because I'm going to use this as a calling script for this piece, okay? So that's my first step, making sure I have that open, okay? The next thing I'm going to do is go into my digital design folder. Mine's on my desktop. Yours should be on your flash drive. I'm going to make a Qlab titles project folder. This already has a Qlab project in it. I'm going to save over that in just a second. Inside that Qlab titles project, I'm going to put my background that I created. And if you have like a working Photoshop file and references and all of that kind of stuff, you can put those folders in here too, just the way that we organized things before as like source files and project files and exported files. We're going to be pulling just from the exported files. So you'll have that, you'll have your text all exported as little PNGs. You'll have your image, right? Your background image. We're going to just call this background image, okay? And your text. So you want to get all that stuff collected together into one folder because Qlab is a referencing software, so it's going to be pointing back to that folder every single time, okay? So that's step two. And then I've opened up Spotify with the song so I can listen to the song as I work, okay? Then I open Qlab, okay? It should be a little icon on your taskbar that looks like this. This Qlab icon, once you open it, you should have a license for video already installed. I should have done that before you get here, but you can just click on it to make sure there's a Pro Video license attached, okay? Then new workspace, built-in blank workspace, great. File, save as. I'm saving it over this Bartenstein title project. You're going to save it with your name inside of that Qlab titles folder, okay? It's important that it's with all of the stuff that goes with it, okay? We say okay because I already have one. I hit replace. For you, it'll just save. Great. So the next thing we need to do is create the video surface that your titles are going to go on, or that all of your content is going to go on. To do that, we go into settings down here, which looks like a little sunshine. You click on settings. There's about 10,000 settings. We're going to do a couple of things right away. We're going to change some stuff in the video category, and we're also going to turn off this auto number new cues. We don't need to auto number them. We're going to number them specifically based on what we're doing, okay? So uncheck auto number new cues. Now go into video. Your video surface 1 is going to be your MacBook screen. That is not where we want anything to go, right? Because if that's your only video surface, then you hit play and your whole computer becomes the titles thing and you can't see what you're doing anymore, okay? So we're actually going to create a video surface for this project, okay? And the way that you do that is you hit this plus button right here. We're gonna do a new empty surface for right now. This is my titles screen, okay? And then I'm gonna change up the dimensions over here to 1920 by 1080, just like we've done on all of the other things. And I'm gonna leave the rest of this stuff the same, okay? At some point, we can add a screen, we can assign an output to this, but for now, we don't need to do that because you're doing this as a sample project all inside your computer. We're not actually connecting you to a projector. So once you've done that, you just hit the X in order to save it, all right? So now it's like, I have an exclamation point. There is no screen for this surface. That's okay. Surface 1, our computer screen, we're gonna get rid of that because we actually don't want Qlab accidentally playing back on our screens, okay? The next thing we're gonna do is change up the cue template. So the cue template gives you some sort of basic starting points for your cues, and we wanna adjust the video cue template to automatically have the video assigned to our titles screen, okay? And so for that reason, I hit title screen right here, okay? Currently, its mode is full surface, which would expand whatever content to fill the whole screen. I actually don't want that to happen automatically either, because we've created content that is scaled appropriately for our 1920 by 1080 full HD surface. We're going to change this automatic to custom geometry. So that means that any file will come in at the actual pixel size you created it, okay? So those are some settings that you'll set up before you get started, okay? So now here we are in Qlab, in the editor itself. I do want you to click on this little listy list picture because that's going to open the active queues, so you will be able to see what's happening, right? If we create a queue right now, it's going to be going nowhere. We won't be able to see it because there's no surface assigned. So for example, if I take my background image, and this is generally how we bring queues into Qlab, I just drag and drop it into the Qlab window, right? I have this background image. My display in geometry has it at full scale on my title screen. Which doesn't look, yeah, it's not by 1080. I say things and then I don't actually get what I want to have happen. Good job, Lily. Okay, so that's more like it. So it's brought in at full scale on that screen. Right now, for the purposes of our experiment, I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees around the Z-axis so that the wood is going horizontally. We're not going to get too deep into that for today's adventure, okay? But if I hit the space bar, I say go, nothing happens. It goes nowhere, okay? Nothing is happening. Nothing's going on, right? So I need to open what's called the audition window, okay? And when I say open audition window, now we can see, especially if you hit this fit button, we'll be able to see what that looks like on the screen, okay? So there it is up on an audition window, a fake version of the screen. I'm gonna make some adjustments just because I can. I feel like right now it's like kind of too big, so I'm gonna scale it down a little bit, and I do that by just clicking on the number in the box and kind of dragging down to make it smaller or up to make it bigger. I'm gonna scale it down. I do want it to fill the whole surface, but I don't want it to be quite so crazy as it was, so I think that's better just in terms of the background setting, okay? So that's my first image. You'll notice when I turned that queue on, I hit the space bar, this active queue panel opens up. Queue list is what it was automatically. Active queue is what I wanted. So active queue is now open. You can see how long it's been playing back. You can see anything that's playing at the same time right over here, okay? You'll also have noticed, possibly, that it made the whole thing a giant piece of wood instantly. It just popped on. Not the cutest, especially considering how slow this song is. So what I'm going to do is hit escape, and escape is like the panic button of Qlab. It's stop all queues. So I'm going to hit escape just to stop the queues, and I'm going to change some settings about this wooden wall that for whatever reason is the background, okay? The first thing I'm going to do is have it start out at 0 opacity. So now if I hit play, you won't see it, it'll be invisible. Then I'm going to add a fade cue. While this is selected, I hit the fade button, and it automatically will target the cue I had selected, okay? So that is now pointing at that background cue. I then come into geometry, and I say opacity 100, right? I want it to fade all the way up to 100, and then action is how long it takes to fade. So over here, I'm gonna make this 12 seconds because this is a slow song, okay? So now if I hit the space bar, I'm playing an invisible background. If I hit the space bar a second time, I am now very slowly fading up the wood, okay? So my wooden wall is fading up, fading up, fading up over 12 seconds, okay? So now that is the new background image. What has happened, right, is we have the first go and a second go. What I want actually to happen is I want those two things to go at the same time. I want the fade to come up as the background is playing, okay? There are a couple of different ways to get there. We're gonna do it kind of the old school way, which is to use the auto follow column or the auto continue column. So when I have this selected and I click underneath the little anchor, I get three options. I get do not continue, auto continue, or auto follow. So auto continue will start playing the next cue as soon as the first cue begins. And that's what I want this time around, okay? So now if I hit escape, everything stops. I can come back in, I can hit the space bar. Both cues start playing at the same time. So as soon as I hit the space bar, it also starts to fade up, okay? So that is setting up my background. I'm now going to group this all together. So if I select the two cues that I want to have in a group together and I click this button over here, the group button, it puts those things inside of a group, and I can call this background, and I'm going to give it a cue number, and in this case I'm using the modifier T for titles. You can number it however you want. You could use either straight numbers or you could put a number that like a letter that works for you, like P for projection, T for titles. I'm going to use T. I'm going to start with number 1. So background is T1. Then I'm going to come back and find my Google Doc, and I'm going to say T1 happens at the start of the song, right? So T1 with start of music, okay? Then just before Who's the Enemy, or as Who's the Enemy is first sung, we're gonna have T2, okay? And so I'm just placing the cue above the word when I want it called. This is kind of a stage manager-y shortcut, all right? So that's the next cue I need to build, is the words for Who's the Enemy. The reason I separate these two is because this song plays for almost a full minute before anyone sings anything. And it goes very, very slowly, so I don't want it to get too far ahead of ourselves, okay? So now I'm gonna grab my text. Okay, let's bring in the first actual title, okay? So the nice thing about the way we did this is your text should all be in order, right? You should have a nice little stack of text that starts at 0 and continues all the way up. So Who's the Enemy is my first little phrase. I'm gonna drag and drop that in, okay? This is gonna be T2. I am going to go ahead and make a little group around it. So because nothing else was selected, it just put it on the outside. I did just grab and drop it into the group. So you'll notice, right, to be inside of a group, you need a blue dot that's inside the folder. To be outside of a group, you need a blue dot that's one step back, right? So that places something outside the folder. This places something inside the folder. This is going to be T2, and it is Who's the Enemy, and I'm going to title it such. Who's the Enemy, okay? I'm gonna just give it the name of the text. If you have a much longer section of text, just use the first few words of that text so that it's easy for you to identify where it was in the script. So I'm gonna do the same basic thing, right? Here's that little piece of text. I'm going to turn it on first, just so I can see it. It's sitting kind of right in the middle. For the purposes of our adventure, I'm actually going to move it kind of over here so that we can still see it while I'm programming, okay? So I'm going to start by placing it where I want it, and I do that by selecting it and then using these translation tools, right? So again, if I push my keyboard up, it's going to move in one direction. Hold, please. Okay. I had to shush Leo. He was being too excited. So if I push up and down, it moves it left and right on the X variable, and then the same thing is true here. So I'm going to start on just this second piece of wood with the word Who's the Enemy, okay? So that's the placement that I want. I also want this to fade in, okay? And I'm going to have a fade, which I get by selecting it. The target is already in place, okay? And now I need to change the geometry, okay? So the geometry, I want opacity to come up to 100%. That's the fade that I want to have happen. The timing of that fade, I'm actually gonna do it in about 2 seconds because I do want it to happen sort of as they start singing. I don't wanna get too far ahead of ourselves. And then I have to go back, okay, to the OG cue, which is currently playing back, and have it start out at a 0 opacity. So I changed the opacity of the words itself down to 0, okay? And then I changed the opacity in the fade cue to 100. I can now come over here and X out the second cue, leaving the background on. If I hit escape, everything goes away. If I just hit the X over in this cue stack, then I only am closing out the cues I don't want to look at anymore. So now I hit the space bar on who's the enemy, right? Nothing happens. It's playing back, but we can't see it. I hit the space bar again, and it fades up, okay? So I do want to do the same thing I did before, which is use an auto continue so that it'll fade up as the cue plays. So let's try this one more time. I hit the space bar, fades up. Great, okay. So now I'm going to set up my next cue. And the easiest way, the most straightforward way to build that is going to be to copy this existing one, okay? So I'm going to use Command C, Command V to copy this existing cue. I'm going to call it T3, okay? I'm going to give it the name of the next line of text, year after year. Okay, and then I'm going to swap out the piece of content, okay? So this piece of content, swap that in, all right? This fade cue should be targeting that now. Okay, great. So now, when I hit the space bar, next piece of text is appearing right on top of the first piece. Because I want it to be one line below, I can select it and then slide it down one line below, okay? I'm gonna turn it off again, and let's try that one more time. There it is. Okay, great. The last thing that I want to do is I want to fade out who's the enemy after year comes on, okay? And the way I'm going to do that is add another fade cue. I'm actually going to select this whole group, click that button, get that fade cue that's targeting the whole T2 group, because if I had more than one thing in there, that was how I would do it. I'm going to put it in the same group with year after year, because I want it to happen as soon as this fade up ends. I want this to fade out. Then I come to geometry, all right? My opacity, I switch that to 0, okay? And then I click over here, the stop target when done, okay? Because I want it not only to fade, I want it to stop. If I don't hit that little stop check mark, it's gonna continue sitting over here eating up my processor, but it's not going to be visible. It's gonna just be like invisibly slowing down my computer, and we don't want that. So now I've added that into this group. I'm gonna come back and do the same auto continue thing just to make it automatically fade out. Actually, I think I'll switch it to auto follow. I'll let this fade up before that fades out, okay? So now I'm gonna X this T3 year after year, make that go away, and I'm gonna see how this looks when I track through this whole sequence. So now I hit the space bar, year after year comes up, and then who's the enemy should be fading out. Boom. And it did, but it didn't do it slowly. It just popped off when it was done. So that tells me that the fade didn't stick. And that's exactly what happened. So this opacity wants to be 0, not 100. Let's try again. And then who's the enemy actually fades out this time. Okay, great. So opacity going down to 0, stop target when done. Brilliant, perfect, okay? So now year after year is going, who's the enemy is gone. I would then continue using these steps to build the rest of my sequence, right? There will be times when instead of having it fade out inside of the group, right? Having it fade out as part of that T3 cue. You want a separate cue that just fades it all out while you wait for some more singing to happen. And in that case, I would pull it out of the group, the fade out cue out of the group, and I would give it a new cue number just for when that happens, okay? And again, as you're doing this, you want to go through here, right, and include where your cues happen. So I'm actually going to place my T3 cue kind of at the end of the word enemy, so that the sound, so that the song, as you sing the song year after year, comes up as the singer starts singing it. So, who's the enemy? Year after year, war after war, who's the enemy? Right? So I want to place it so that it comes at the end of that line before, just so that it overlaps with the singing and works with the song playback. Does that make sense? I hope it does. So I would play with that to start, and go ahead and write down, make documentation of where all of those cue placements are on your little script that you've been working with. And then lastly, real quick before I end this video, I do want to show you a couple other things you can do. This is all optional, so from here forward is optional, okay? So there are other kinds of animation that you can do using these fade cues, right? We've been only animating the opacity, but you can animate in other ways, right? So as an example, you can animate position, right? So if I wanted year after year to slide in from the side instead of fading in, I would change its animation, its fade cue from the opacity fader to the translation fader, right? And I would give it the geometry from the target, right? So if I've placed it where I want it, I want to set geometry from the target. Okay, I only want it to capture translation X and Y. I don't want it to mess with everything else. So I hit apply. So now, year after year will fade up and slide in simultaneously, okay? Because translation is part of its equation. So let me show you what this then looks like, all right? So we have who's the enemy is here, and then we have year after year, which is not doing the thing I thought it would do. Oh, I know why. Once I've set this the way that I want it to, I actually come back in to this cue and I start it off screen. All right, so if I start it off screen, now it'll go to the place that I wanted it. So let's look at that again. So who's the enemy is fading in, year after year is fading in and sliding on. Right? If you want it to fade or slide more slowly, you slow down this time, this speed of that fade, okay? If you want it to float up as it fades out, same idea, right? If you want it to fade at a different speed from the movement, you use two fade cues to do that, okay? You use one fade cue that's fading it in, and adjusting the opacity, and you use another fade cue that's adjusting position, translation, okay? You can also control things like the scale, right? You can do all of these different functions based on that geometry feature, okay, in the fade cue. The other thing you can do is things called a relative fade. So if you want it to move relative to where it is now, that is often a lot easier when you're fading things out. Then you can say, instead of an absolute fade where I go from wherever I was to this new place, this new specific place on the screen, I would say I want a relative fade. So I go from wherever I was and I slide 300 pixels to the left or the right, or I slide 300 pixels up or down. And so if this says relative fade instead of absolute fade, then your translation will be relative to wherever the image is placed right now, okay? So that's how you do other basic animation using Qlab fades, okay? I think that's enough for you to get started. If there are specific questions, definitely let me know and I can help you sort of get your content where you want it, okay? And yeah, let's start there and we'll see how it goes from here. All right, thanks, Sens. Bye.